This video is going to be on how to draw and analyze histograms. Now, histograms is the highest level topic in the handling data section of maths, and so it appears usually at the last couple of questions of the paper. Now, before we start, there's a couple of things that we need to learn before we go into our exam, and these two formula. So the first formula is frequency density equals frequency divided by class width. Now, as you can see in my little diagram, although it's a little bit fuzzy, you can see that histograms are measured on this thing called frequency density here. Now, there's a second formula for you to learn, unless you're good at rearranging formula, and that is to calculate the frequency. Now, this is just frequency equals this frequency density times class width. Okay, so my first example, I'm going to show you how to complete a histogram. So again, I've got my grouped frequency table here, and usually if I'm just asked to draw a histogram, I'll only be given these first two columns. Remember, just like all of the other handling data questions, sometimes you may have to put these extra columns on yourself. Okay, so we want to calculate the frequency density for each of these groups. Now we do that by doing the frequency divided by the class width. Now the class width is literally just how big these classes, these groups are. So the class width of this first row is just how big this gap is, and this gap is just 5. So I'm just going to put a class width of 5 in for the first row. The second row, the class width is going to be 10 because the distance between 5 and 15 is 10. So I'm going to put the class width here as 10. The third row between 15 and 30 has got a gap of 15. And for this last row, the gap is 20. So as you can see, the class width is not actually that hard to calculate. Okay, so now I just need to calculate this frequency density column. Now, if you remember from earlier, the formula that we needed to remember was frequency divided by class width. So for this first row, I need to do 20 divided by 5, which is 4. This second row, I need to do 35 divided by 10, which is 3.5. And lastly, 45 divided by 15, which is 3. Okay, so far so good. The class width is not particularly hard to find, and this frequency density is just a case of remembering a formula. Now, usually in these histogram questions, they get you to choose the scale that you're going to use for the frequency density yourself. Now, in this case, we're sort of forced into our scale because they've given you already one bar done for you, which is the last one between 30 and 50. So we know that this has got a frequency density of 1.5. So I know I need 1.5 sitting here on my scale. So now I've got to think a little bit about what I need to do as a scale in order to get up to the third rung of 1.5. And hopefully you can see that I'm going up in 0.5s. So now I'm going to put my scale on, going up in 0.5. So I've got 0.5, 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, 4, 4.5, and finally 5 at the top here. So to draw a histogram now, what I'm going to do is do something very similar to what I did with frequency diagrams, only instead of having bars that are going to be 20 high, the frequency high, they're going to be as high as the frequency density. So my first bar is between 0 and 5, and that's going to go all the way up to 4. My second bar is between 5 and 15, and this is going to go up to 3.5. My third bar is between 15 and 30, and that's going to go up to 3. And the fourth bar is already completed for me. So there we go, we have our histogram drawn. Now another thing they could ask you on a histogram question is to try and calculate a frequency given a histogram already drawn. Now we would use the second formula for this, where we have to do the frequency equaling the frequency density times the class width. So in order to get the frequency here, I need to do 20 times 1.5, which is 30. Now this can be especially useful when it comes to analyzing histograms, which I'm coming on to now. So this second example is going to be all about analysing histograms. So I've got the histogram drawn from my first example here, and the question I've got to answer is estimating how many of the students scored over 35 marks. Okay, so the way I would start this is I would find where 35 is on my histogram, and I would highlight the section which is greater than 35, which is this part here. Now, in order to find how many students are in that section, I need to calculate the frequency. Now, the frequency, if you remember, is the frequency density, where in this section it is 1.5, multiplied by the class width. Now, the class width of this section is from 35 to 50, which is 15. Now, if I do 1.5 times 15, then I get an answer of 22.5. So as this is an estimate, I'm going to round this to the nearest person, which is 23. Okay, so another question that they could ask you is what proportion of students scored less than 10? Now, if you remember, proportion questions are asking for either a fraction or a percentage. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing that I did before, and I'm going to identify the part of my histogram which is less than 10. So I'll draw my line and highlight the section which is less than 10. As you can see, this less than 10 crosses 2 bars. So first off, I need to find out what the frequency of my first bar is, which is 4, frequency density of 4, times the class width of 5, which is 20. The second part, okay, this is between 5 and 10, okay, has got a frequency density of 3.5. And again, it's got a class width of 5. So 3.5 times 5 is 17.5 people. So in total here, the people that scored less than 10, it's going to be those two values added up, 20 and 17.5, which equals 37.5, which to the nearest person roughly is 38 people. So now I need to calculate how many people there are in total. So I need the frequency of every single bar. So the very first one is going to be a frequency density of 4 multiplied by the class width of 5, which is 20. The second bar has a frequency density of 3.5 multiplied by a class width of 10 is 35. The fourth bar has got a frequency density of 3 and it's got a class width of 15, so that has got a frequency of 45. And finally, I've got a frequency density of 1.5, need to multiply it by a class width of 20, and I get a frequency of 30. Now adding all of these values up, 20 plus 35 plus 45 plus 30, I get a total of 130 people. So finally, to get this proportion, which I'm going to do as a percentage, I need to do 38 divided by the 130 people times it by 100. I get a percentage of 29.2% to one decimal place. Okay, so hopefully that's helped you in understanding how to draw histograms and to analyse them. Again, I suggest to have a go at as many exam questions on histograms as possible, because it is a very regular question that comes up and a very doable A&A style question as well. Okay, good luck.